Good afternoon, Legal Good. This is Nathan Saunders. You are here with me, hopefully, for day 6 of the Robert Tellis murder trial. Now, starting yesterday, the defense has taken over and they've now put on 2 witnesses. We are at a point in the trial where the prosecution has laid out a roadmap for the jury to follow with respect to whether or not this individual is guilty. So before the court begins, I just want to try to take us through a timeline of the events as they occurred leading up to this crime and when the crime occurred, and then the events that occurred after the crime took place. Jeff, good to see you here. Glad you could join me. So in early 2022, an individual named Robert Tellis, who was the Clark County Public Administrator, contacted the police department basically alleging that the prior public administrator's office had engaged in some nefarious activities with respect to giving contracts to a group of people associated with Compass Realty. And under those contracts, I guess, the Compass Realty Group was able to undervalue properties of deceased people and kind of flip those homes such that they would have straw buyers purchase the homes, and Compass Realty, the people associated with Compass Realty, would make out like bandits when those homes got sold, thus depriving the heirs of the decedent of the profits associated with those homes and the contents of those homes. So he brought all this to the attention of the police department. Now, an individual with the police department by the name of Detective Jappy was assigned to investigate that case. He's not a murder detective. He's not a homicide detective. He's a detective with a different department of the police. And he begins this investigation into these activities in the public administrator's office. And during the course of that investigation, another investigation is going on. A reporter is investigating the goings on currently in the public administrator's office. And he's doing so at the behest of certain individuals who have been working in the public administrator's office long before Robert Tellis arrived at the public administrator's office as the public administrator. These individuals are alleging that Mr. Tellis is creating a hostile work environment. Now, they're making these allegations after having gone to human resources on multiple occasions to tell the human resources department of this alleged hostile work environment, and the human resource department is doing nothing about it. So now this reporter is the only person who seems to be taking these employees of the public administrator's office seriously. So this reporter is investigating Mr. Tellis, essentially, and how he is operating the public administrator's office, because he is leading the public administrator's office. And he begins publishing articles that are not too friendly to Robert Tellis. And those articles kind of lead to someone else running for public administrator, because there's a campaign going on while these articles are being published, and somebody throws their hat in to become the new public administrator. That person works in the public administrator's office as an individual by the name of Rita Reed. She's been with the public administrator's office for quite some time, and she's now throwing her hat in to become the public administrator instead of Robert Tellis. So they're running against each other at this point. And these articles keep coming out. Eventually, Robert Tellis loses the election. So This is in 2022, and Robert Tejas loses the election. So in 2023, he's no longer going to be public administrator. Rita Reed is. So in about June of 2022, Robert Tejas stops going to work for the most part. And I'm only giving you things that have been presented to the jury at this point. This is not anything from any news articles or anything. This is all things that have been presented to the jury by this point in the trial. So in around June, he stops going to work essentially. Rita Reed begins making policies and procedures for the public administrator's office, and Compass Realty at this point is not making quite as much money as they used to make with the public administrator's office, but now Rita Reed is essentially running the show. So at the same time, even though Robert Tejas is no longer going to be the public administrator, and even though he's pretty much operating from home to the extent that he is working as the public administrator, Mr. Gehrman continues to investigate what has been going on in the public administrator's office, and he's making public record requests for certain communications between Robert Tejas and individuals within and outside of the public administrator's office. Now, fast forward to about the end of August, early September of 2022. So at the end of August, an individual sees somebody dressed in kind of construction worker attire. They've got this big hat on, this big straw hat. They've got kind of a COVID mask on. They've got a orange kind of construction type long sleeve shirt on. They've got black gloves, jeans, and dark colored pants, and tennis shoes. We don't know what color they are, but gym shoes. And they're at the park, and they're acting suspiciously in the park. This individual takes note of this suspicious activity, doesn't call the police, but just notes that this suspicious activity took place as she is watching her grandchildren at the park. She then goes into her vehicle. She sees this individual again running across the street, going to another park, takes note of that. And while this person is running across the street, his face mask and his hat are coming off, and she sees a light-skinned, bald-head person running across the street. She does not note any facial features. She can't make out who it is. That's on August 28th. At sometime in there, an individual in the public administrator's office, Roberta Lee Kennett, gets essentially a directive to release all of the communications that have been requested by Mr. Gehrman to the Office of Communications with Clark County, so that those communications can then be released to Mr. Gehrman. She notifies Robert Tejas of this. That happens either on the 1st or 2nd of September. On September 2nd, 2022, an individual goes to Mr. Gehrman's home, lies in wait for Mr. Gehrman, and proceeds to murder Mr. Gehrman. That individual is the individual on the left in this image. He's wearing, as you can see, a broad brimmed straw hat, an orange long sleeve construction worker type shirt, dark slacks, gym shoes. The individual in the park also had a bag, and this individual has a bag. The difference between the individual in the park and this individual is the reflective material on the orange shirt. The individual in the park did not have reflective material, according to the witness. This individual has reflective material. The police found this image by canvassing Mr. Gehrman's neighborhood for security camera footage, surveillance camera footage, and they began increasing their search as they gained more and more evidence, and eventually their search for surveillance camera footage reached a 5-mile radius around Mr. Gehrman's house. As they searched that camera footage, not only did they get footage of the suspect walking around Mr. Gehrman's neighborhood, but they also associated the suspect with a certain vehicle. The suspect can be seen entering and leaving this vehicle. It's a Yukon Denali, reddish colored, factory rims with the rear windows tinted, the front windows not tinted, luggage rack on top. And they gather camera footage showing a lot of instances of this particular vehicle entering and leaving Mr. Gehrman's neighborhood on the morning of the murder. And they also have images of this vehicle after the murder takes place, leaving Mr. Gehrman's neighborhood, and a very similar reddish colored Yukon Denali traveling down streets that would lead directly from Mr. Gehrman's neighborhood to Mr. Tejas' neighborhood, and in fact, pulling into Mr. Tellis's subdivision at around the time it would have taken for the suspect to have left Mr. Gehrman's home after committing the crime and traveling to Mr. Tellis's neighborhood. Now, leading up to the crime, there is no license plate on the back of the reddish colored Yukon Denali. When the vehicle is seen entering into Mr. Tellis's neighborhood of the similar vehicle, there is a license plate on the back of the red Yukon Denali. But Mr. Tellis has a very similar looking Yukon Denali associated with him. In fact, a few days after the crime takes place, he can be seen washing the exterior of the red Yukon Denali that is registered to his wife. That reddish colored Yukon Denali has factory rims, a luggage rack, tinted windows in the rear, non-tinted windows in the front. But during the course of Mr. Jappy's investigation into Mr. Tejas, some information that Mr. Tejas may be involved in bribing people to give them kickbacks from the home sales associated with the public administrator's office. That information comes from one Kimberly McMahon. Kimberly McMahon was a lieutenant with the Clark County Detention Center. But at the time that she gives Mr. Jappy the information regarding Mr. Tejas' alleged nefarious actions with respect to bribing her, she is no longer a lieutenant with the Clark County Detention Center. Based on that, Mr. Jappy gets the police to surveil Mr. Tejas. And they have his phone essentially tapped. Now, as his phone is being tapped during the commission of this crime, the police are able to locate his telephone at his home the entire time that this crime is taking place. However, For those several hours that the police have surveillance video of this reddish colored Yukon Denali traversing around Mr. Gehrman's neighborhood, there's incoming calls and incoming text messages to Mr. Tellis's phone, but there's no outgoing traffic the entire time. It isn't until well after the vehicle that is seen entering into Mr. Tellis's neighborhood, that reddish colored Yukon Denali is entering into Mr. Tellis's neighborhood. It isn't until after that you begin seeing outgoing traffic from Mr. Tellis's telephone. Now, the court is about to start. So I'm going to pick up a recap of the evidence that the prosecution has presented during the breaks and perhaps after the morning session is done. But for now, that's where we are. We're at the point where Mr. Tellis is allegedly at home with his phone, but he's not using it during the entire time that this crime is being committed by someone who operates a red Yukon Denali very similar to the one registered to his wife. That's where we'll pick up. For now, let's see what the court is doing.
Piano. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Draskovich?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may call your next witness.
Thank you. The defense calls Mr. Robert Aguero.
This is defense witness number 3. Good to see you, Bernard and Natalie. Thanks for joining us. Please step up into the witness stand. Remain standing. Raise your right hand. Face the clerk, please.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Robert Aguero, R-O-B-E-R-T-A-G-U-E-R-O.
Thank you. Mr. Aguero, how are you employed?
I own my own company, which is solely focused on cell phone forensics and cell tower data analysis.
If you could please tell us a little bit about your history in reference to this subject area.
I started this business about 15 years ago. I've received training from Celebrite and certification from Celebrite on extracting data, analyzing data from cell phone. I've also received training from SecureView. That's another manufacturer of different software. As far as the cell tower analysis, I've received training from GeoTime. That's the software that I use for mapping on the proper method for mapping data. I've received various trainings from different companies, all dealing with the mapping and analysis of cell phone data. And I attend yearly seminars to keep up with the latest changes in both technologies.
Prior to your owning DataPro, have you worked with law enforcement?
Yes, I spent 15 years in law enforcement. Half the time I worked in patrol, the other half I worked detectives. And then I retired after 15 years on a medical retirement.
Where are you currently residing?
I currently reside in the state of Washington.
Have you been called upon in other cases to give expert testimony concerning cell phone extraction?
Yes, I have.
You were contacted by the defense in the state of Nevada versus Robert Tellis, correct?
Yes.
And did you prepare a report as a result of your being contracted by the defense in this
Yes.
case? Did you prepare a PowerPoint in reference to your evaluation and analysis of data that was given to you?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, at this time we'd move for the admission by stipulation of Defense Exhibit A3.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Permission to publish. And this is, Clark County Superior Court, but I mean, it's state of Nevada, it's the court, this matter.
Yes.
Points of interest were 7216 Bronze Circle, correct?
Correct, yes.
9624 Spanish Steps.
Correct.
Planet Fitness located on West Charleston.
Correct, yes.
And a Planet Fitness located on 230 South Decatur.
Correct, yes.
The data that you analyzed concerned cell phone number 702-533-1858, correct?
Yes.
And how was it that you verified that the information that we're about to address is tied to this cell phone number?
Well, when you look at the call detail records or all the records that I analyze, they either have the phone number or they have the international mobile subscriber identity that identifies the subscriber. So those all matched to this number.
Turn your attention to page number 3. If you could explain to the jury what is this that we're looking at?
In this page, we're looking at the T-Mobile mediation report, which is referred to as a call detail records, and that is showing you the cell towers that are used for voice transactions. Now, the T-Mobile mediation report only covered August 1st, 2022 through August 16th, 2022. So when you see a blue dot, that is the location of the cell tower, and then the shaded area would be the sector coverage. And again, the shaded area is only a visual aid to help you see the area. It is not an actual propagation map, so it's just a visual aid.
And if you could explain what a propagation map is.
A radio frequency propagation map is when you're interested in a specific tower and a specific antenna, and you want to find out what the coverage is. You can either request it from the phone company or take specialized equipment, go out to the area, and you measure the radio frequencies from the tower. And then you can actually draw a map that shows the actual coverage of a specific sector.
I'll get a little bit ahead of ourselves. There came a point in time where you were asked to review pen register records, correct?
Yes,
And that would have been records beginning at or about August 7th, 2022?
yes,
But at this point in time, just to give reference, you didn't review any pen register records, and I'll tell you they didn't exist from August 1st, 2022 to August 16th, 2022.
yes. At this point on this map, the only item we're looking at is the T-Mobile mediation report, which again, that just details voice transactions that are made by the phone.
In reference to this X right here, bronze circle, you don't have any communication or any pings, basically would be the word, with any cell phone towers close to that.
That's correct. There's between August 1st and August 16th, there were no towers used that were near the bronze circle location.
However, we do have pings, or we have communication with cell towers in the area of 9624 Spanish Steps Lane, Las Vegas,
Yes,
as well as two Planet Fitness locations. Fair to say?
correct, yes.
The one is Planet Fitness is 8945 West Charleston Boulevard.
Yes,
We have some that are right next to that, correct?
yes, we do.
And that would indicate that the cell phone tower would be in proximity to that address.
Yeah, that tells us that that address is within coverage of this tower, so that's definitely one address where the phone could be at. Now, this data is not specific enough to pinpoint a specific location for you, just a general area.
Just the general area. Same question as to this other Planet Fitness, the address being 230 South Decatur Boulevard in Las Vegas. We do have pings near that area as well.
Correct, yes.
And again, you can't say that that means that person is specifically there, but it's a cell phone tower that's in proximity to that address.
Correct, yes.
And just so we're clear too, when you have these pings or this communication between a cell phone device and a tower, there may be various towers that are communicating or exchanging data, phone calls, text. It will show that there's activation or communication, but they don't always necessarily speak with the closest or communicate with the closest cell tower.
Correct. The cell phone will communicate with the tower that has the strongest, clearest signal. So the strongest, clearest signal can be one that's close by, but quite often if you're in a busy area or if the network will level the usage out, so you could be next to one tower, but yet your phone will connect to another tower that's a little further away. again, it goes to the cleanest, clearest signal for connections.
If I could turn your attention to page 4. If you could please explain to us the significance of this analysis.
This is the same data we saw on the previous page. I just zoomed in so we can better see the various addresses that we've been talking about. But it's the exact same data that we saw before it was zoomed out. Now we're just zoomed into a smaller area.
You know, in this case, in the lower portion of the exhibit, it appears that we have these fanning out images. If you could
Yes.
explain to us what those are and what those signify in this exhibit.
Again, when you see the blue dot, that's the location of the cell tower. When you see a little pie wedge going out, that represents a sector. Typically, most towers have, a tower is just basically a tall structure or a building, and then on top, you'll see a bunch of antennas all around it. The way that the carriers lay out the network, they divide them into sectors, which is, if you take a full circle around a tower, you divide it into 3 equal shapes, 3 pie wedges. Each one of those would be a sector. On some of them, you may see like a full circle going all around. That's because either a sector was not provided for us, the orientation of the sector, or it could be an omnidirectional antenna. So when you don't see a sector, it means it could be anywhere around the tower. When you see the pie wedges, then the phone is somewhere where the blue shading is located. And again, these are just visual aids. They don't represent the actual coverage for each sector.
And again, turning your attention to the 2 Planet Fitness locations, again, we have cell phone towers that were communicating in the area of this subject telephone number.
Yes.
This cell phone device.
Yes.
Turning your attention to slide number 5. Again, if you could explain to us the significance of this slide and your findings.
Yes, I was asked about the 2 Planet Fitness and when were the towers near connected. And then we see the one on the right-hand side of the map that was connected on August 9th, 2022. And then we have the time and the incoming or outgoing. It just denotes whether there's an incoming call or outgoing call. On the left side of the other Planet Fitness, there's 2 towers that were in close proximity. So I put a blue circle highlighting the 2 towers, and then those are all the dates shown there that the phone connected to those 2 towers.
And when a phone connects to a tower, if you could explain to us the various ways in which it does connect to the tower.
Well, typically a phone is a high-priced walkie-talkie, for lack of a better term. So when you hit send on your phone, it uses radio frequencies and sends a signal to the tower with the clearest, strongest signal. The tower will connect to the phone. You get authenticated as a phone user with that carrier, and then your call gets routed to whoever you're calling. And as long as you're connected, then there'll be 2-way communication. Now, the records we have in this pages, they will show typically the starting cell tower. That's what I'm mapping out here. So if you spend 10 minutes on a phone call, we have the starting tower. If you're moving around, you could hit other towers. However, they're not recorded in the records we have. So we're only being shown the tower that the initial connection made to the phone.
Turning your attention to slide 6, the pen register. Obviously, you were provided with information obtained from law enforcement concerning a pen register, correct?
Yes.
Could you explain just briefly what a pen register is?
Basically, that's when law enforcement gets a court order, goes to the phone company, and then they track all the calls that are made and text message, data usage by that phone during a specific time frame. And then what we're provided is a spreadsheet with the date, time, and cell towers that were connected.
Turning your attention to slide page number 7, if you could explain to us the significance and what your analysis was concerning this data that you were provided, specifically on August 28th, 2022.
For this page, I was asked to look at August 28th, 2022 for all of the connections shown on the pen register. And for that date, there was only 2 cell towers that were used. One is located to the northwest of the Spanish Steps location. And then on that tower, we have, excuse me, a breakdown. There were data sessions that were recorded between 12:39 a.m. all the way down to 11:35 p.m. There was 2 voice calls that were made, and the times are listed there. And there was 1 text message at 1:50 p.m. that connected with that tower. The other tower that was used is to the southeast of the Spanish Step location, and all of the connections to that tower were data sessions. There were no voice calls or text messages, so those are all data sessions, and these are the only 2 towers that were connected during that day.
So it's my understanding that based upon your testimony, this is all the phone usage based upon the records that were provided to you that had occurred on August 28th, 2022. We have the data sessions. We have, apparently, there was 2 voice communications and 1 text message.
Correct.
And that was for the entire day of that day.
Yes.
If I told you that this was a Sunday, any reason to disagree with me?
No.
Is it fair to say that based upon your analysis of this cell phone data, it appears that the cell phone and presumably its user were at this address, 9624 Spanish Steps?
Overruled, you can answer.
Okay. Again, this data gives you the general area where the phone could be, so there's no way of knowing if it was located right at Spanish Steps, but that is a location where it could have been. It could also be anywhere in that general area. Again, the data is not precise enough to pinpoint a specific address.
You don't see any other cell phone communication with any cell phone towers outside of this area in these 2 cell phone towers, fair to say?
Correct, yes.
Turning your attention now to the pen register data that was provided to you concerning September 2nd, 2022. If you'd explain to us what we're looking at here on page 9 or slide 9 of your analysis.
Here we're looking at the pen register data for September 2nd, 2022. And again, all of the blue dots are cell towers that were used on that day for either voice, text, or data.
Again, we have cell phone towers in the area of 9624 Spanish Steps, correct?
Correct, yes.
And we also have the cell phone towers that are in the area of the Planet Fitness, being at 8945 West Charleston Boulevard.
That is correct, yes.
It appears that we have no cell phone or no data communication, either outgoing text, ingoing text, or data, the automatic communication between the cell phone and the tower over at the Planet Fitness over on Decatur, correct?
Not on this date, no.
And nor do we have any cell phone towers that were activated or communicated with or pinged on the 7216 Bronze Circle address.
That is correct, yes.
Turning your attention to this slide, page 10, slide 10, if you could explain to us what we were looking at here.
What we're going to see in the next few pages is the date broken down in smaller segments. This first segment covers between 1:34 and 6:44 a.m., where the 1 tower northwest of the home is being utilized. And again, all of the data connections are for data sessions. There were no voice calls or text messages.
And just so we're clear when we're looking at this list, I mean, because we have a data session at 1:34:14 a.m., that doesn't mean the user of this phone is on the phone. That just means that the phone is communicating or exchanging data with with the towers.
Yes, data sessions can be active usage or passive usage. Active usage is when you're going on Facebook, Instagram, searching the internet, doing something actively on the phone. And then you have passive usage where the phone will connect to the towers on its own in the background. That's just a normal part of the operation of how cell phones work. As long as it's turned on, it is constantly communicating with cell towers.
So a person could be sound asleep at 1:34 a.m., and obviously we have this data because that's what the cell phone is doing independently.
Correct, yes.
I could turn your attention to slide number 11. If you could discuss with us your findings in reference to this slide.
Here we're looking at the next time frame is from 6:45 to 6:50 a.m. and we see 4 different towers that are being utilized. The times are listed for each tower. And again, all of these are data sessions, so none of these are voice or text message.
So we don't have any active usage on the part of the person that presumably has the cell phone, if they do.
Correct. With data session, it can all be background. There's no way of knowing from these records whether it's active or background.
Slide page number 12, if you could explain to us your analysis concerning this information.
Here we go to the next time frame. This is between 7:09 a.m. and 3:47 p.m. And again, we have the same 2 towers that we've seen used before, one to the northwest and one to the southeast of the Spanish Steps location. The one to the northwest, on the left side, we see all of the data sessions. Again, those could be background or it could be active. And then there were several text message and 3 voice calls that utilized that tower. And then on the lower right tower, we have, again, a breakdown of 1 text message, 3 voice calls, and then the rest are all data sessions that connected with the tower on the lower right.
I could turn your attention to slide page 13. If you could please discuss with us what we're viewing here.
Here we're looking at the next time frame is from 4 p.m. to 4:20 p.m. During this time frame, again, we have 5 cell towers. The one at the lower part of the map is for a voice call, so we know that's something that the phone connected to the tower. The others are all data sessions, which they could be background data sessions or active data sessions.
Based upon your review of the cell tower, cell phone communication based upon this pen register, is it fair to say that the person who had this phone was in the area of the Planet Fitness?
Sustained.
Does it appear that the cell phone was in proximity or in the area of the Planet Fitness?
Yes, that's definitely one of the locations where it could have been.
And that is consistent with the findings in your previous slides as well.
Yes.
Again, you had testified that it's not necessarily the closest cell tower that basically we have a ping, but it's the strongest.
Correct.
And that would be consistent, again, with what we see here. That this person was in, or that the cell phone was in the area of both the Spanish Steps home as well as the Planet Fitness on Charleston.
Yes, the tower on the lower right of the map, that one is, when I measured, is almost equal distance to the Spanish Steps and Planet Fitness. So either location could be a location where the phone was found or somewhere in between in that general area.
Here we have then much later in the day, again, we have, it appears, data sessions. If you could please just briefly explain this to us.
Yeah, here we're going through the end of the day from 4:27 p.m. to 11:55 p.m. And we have 3 different towers that are being utilized, and they're all for data sessions.
Again, we don't have active use where perhaps a user, we're having texts that are being sent, phone calls that are being made.
Correct, yeah, this data that we have, that we're provided with, there's no way of knowing if anyone was actually using the phone or if it was just sitting there with background connections.
If you could explain to us on this next slide the Celebrite locations and what the basis was for your analysis and what it is that we are viewing here.
Here, I was provided a Celebrite, which is a forensic software for extracting data from the phone. I was asked to look for any locations available for the year of 2022. And when I pulled the locations for 2022, this is what came up. Now, in this case, the dot represents the...
Thank you.
Seems to be telling us what we already know, that the phone was at the house during the commission of the crime. I'd like to know how he deals with, or if he's going to deal with, the information that was provided by the police department showing the incoming and outgoing messages and calls, or lack of outgoing calls, while they had that track and trace in place. And what that data might show or may not show with respect to whether or not Mr. Tellis was using his telephone the entire time that this crime is taking place and the entire time that this red Yukon Denali is meandering around the city. So far, all he seems to be showing is, hey, this is where the phone was, and there's these 3 towers around Mr. Tellis's home that are all kind of picking up data depending on how much traffic is going back and forth from one tower or another. These other towers may be picking up the overflow data around Mr. Tellis's home. And during the commission of this crime, the phone was either at home or, in the vicinity of this Planet Fitness. I don't know if Mr. Tellis is in Planet Fitness, 10 hours out of the day or what.
I'm going to take a short recess. During this recess, you're welcome to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case or its merits, either by.
It looks like we're going into recess. Let's see if we're still in recess because we are slightly behind. They may be coming back from recess at this point. I don't know, but we are muted. Oh, there we go. Oh, back on mute. So Mortal Clown says your assessment of her was much more generous than mine, but it was worth seeing everyone jump when she pulled out her notes. Yeah, again, you can't pull out notes when you're on the stand. You can only refer to what the attorneys allow you to refer to. In fact, in depositions, I've had, and this is especially true when I've had the opportunity to depose police officers. They often want to refer back to the report that they've drafted, and I have to stop them and say, no, I want your recollection, not your report. We'll get to your report, and I have to stop them from pulling out that report. And oftentimes their counsel will say, no, he can refer to his report. And I say, no, he can't. The deposition is to proceed as trial proceeds. And in trial, you don't have your report sitting in front of you. In trial, you don't have notes sitting in front of you. You only get to refer to what I say you can refer to. And right now, you can't refer to your report. You can't refer to your notes. So yeah, Mortal Clown, pulling out notes is not a good idea. She also says, whatever the 33-minute incoming one was about. Yes, that 33-minute incoming, nobody's really dealt with that. And I was a little confused as to why the prosecution didn't deal with that 33-minute incoming. And the jury is going to have these exhibits back with them. But, who knows? So while we're on this break, I don't know how long this break is going to be, but let's get back to the evidence. So we were kind of stuck where we left off here with respect to the cell phone data. During the time that this crime is taking place, this car is meandering around the city. And according to the evidence that the prosecution put on the entire time, this cell phone is in the house. Now, there's all this cell phone data. And the cell phone data, the cell tower data is showing that not only is the phone in the house, but there's all these incoming texts and incoming phone calls, and there's nothing outgoing. There was a 33-minute incoming something incoming to the phone that lasted 33 minutes. That's what it appeared to be. Nobody asked about it. So perhaps I read it wrong with respect to it being 33 minutes, but it appeared from when they showed the exhibit that there was a 33-minute something on the phone. The defense didn't bring it up. The prosecution didn't bring it up, but it was on there. So somebody's going to have to deal with it, or else the jury's going to be able to draw their own conclusions as to what that thing that looks like a 33-minute session on the phone was. Compare that to the times that everything is taking place. But thus far, it appears that the phone was at home. So The police department at that point now has surveillance footage of the vehicle that kind of matches the vehicle belonging to Mr. Tellis's wife that he has access to. And they have a motive because Detective Jappy, in investigating this situation at the public administrator's office, is now going to the lead homicide detective and saying, hey, this person who was just killed was investigating Mr. Tellis, and Mr. Tellis seems upset about this investigation. Look at all of these social media posts where he is calling what Mr. Gehrman is reporting on lies. He's saying essentially that this guy's out to get me. And then he lost the election essentially because of the articles that Mr. Gehrman posted. So Mr. Jappy brings that information to the police department, but the police department is at that point already down the path of investigating Mr. Tellis. And coupled with the motive, and then further surveillance footage of Mr. Tellis washing this vehicle, they go get a search warrant. The search warrant is signed on the morning of, I believe it was September 7th. So the police patrol officers are told, look, if you see Mr. Tellis leave his home on the morning of the 7th, you are to stop him, because we are going to be executing a search warrant and we want him and we want the stuff in his house. So Mr. Tellis leaves the home. He's pulled over. According to Nevada law, anytime the police have an interaction with a private citizen, they are to turn on their body-worn cameras. The police do that when they stop Mr. Tellis. It's early in the morning, so the lead detective is sleeping. The patrol officers call the lead detective. I believe her name is Detective Gaddis. Detective Gaddis gets up out of bed, goes to where Mr. Tellis has been pulled over. At the same time that the police have this body-worn camera footage going, she turns on her audio recorder, because even though she's a detective and isn't required to wear the body-worn cameras, as a practice, she records every encounter that she has with private citizens because she doesn't want to be called into question as to her actions or what she said later on. So we've got these audio recordings. During that encounter, she calls Detective Jappy for help. When she arrives at the scene, Mr. Tellis is in the back of a police vehicle, a patrol car. He cannot get out. You can't get out of the back of a patrol car. If you can, you're a magician. I don't understand how people get out of the back of patrol cars. You can't unlock the doors. The door handles don't work, but some people have figured out ways. Most people can't. Mr. Tellis couldn't, let's assume, because he didn't get out. So he is not free to leave, but he has not been arrested. Detective Gaddis takes him back to the Summerlin station and they question him. They take his jeans because they are dark colored. She doesn't recall if they also took his shirt, but when he leaves the department, he's clad in a paper outfit. The entire time period that she and or Mr. Jappy are with, Detective Jappy are with Mr. Tellis, everything's being recorded. Even when she's not in the room, her recorder is still there. So there are transcripts of everything that happened up to that point. There are not transcripts of anything that occurred prior to Detective Gaddis arriving at the scene where Mr. Tellis had been pulled over. During those conversations, Detective Jappy alludes to the fact that Mr. Tellis is not going to have to worry about his alarm waking him up ever again. So he's basically saying, you're going to jail for the rest of your life. Now, they, during that encounter, also take swabs of Mr. Tellis, what's called buccal swabs of Mr. Tellis's DNA. They take these buccal swabs, they take photographs of his person. There are no injuries to his body that are visible other than an injury, I believe, to his left ring finger. He's right hand dominant, but there is a nasty little wound to his left ring finger. There are photographs of that. Mr. Tellis is then taken home by Detective Jappy and Detective Gaddis. They are together in the ride home. They drop him off at his house. Before they drop him off, the search warrant is effectuated on Mr. Tellis's home. Obviously, Mr. Jappy's not there. Why? Because Mr. Jappy is with Mr. Tellis. So we know Detective Jappy was not at his home. While they're searching Mr. Tellis's home, they come up with shoes that look very much like the shoes worn by the assailant. These shoes, one of these shoes has been mutilated. So the rear of the shoe is essentially cut off. The pieces of the rear of the shoe are in a baggie. And they're in little pieces, tiny little pieces, yay big, cut up, finely minced. They find this under a reclining sofa. There are two officers in the room. Count them two. 1, 2. Two officers in the room. When these shoes are found, during the questioning of one of the officers who was in training to become a detective at the time that this shoe was found, the defense posits that his name is nowhere on any of the reports regarding who was at the home. Now, this is Detective Nahum. Detective Nahum's name is spelled E as in Edgar, Nahum. Nahum. On cross-examination, the prosecutor brings up the report. She says, okay, on this page, he says on this page, there's someone identified here. What is your first initial? E. And what is your last name? Nahum, Nahum. And what's your PIN number? Gives this PIN number. On the page of the report regarding the finding of this shoe, the person associated with finding this shoe is 1E, as in Edgar, Nahum, Nahun. Same PIN number as Detective Nahum. Detective Nahum says, well, there's always a problem with my name. As you, the defense attorney, have had problems with my name. It was obviously spelled wrong. So essentially, the defense failed to find this person's name in the report because it was spelled wrong in the report, but it was on the report twice. So he was definitely there. Mr. Jappy definitely was not. Also found during the search was a cut up, wide brim straw hat with 3 little buttonhole type things, black buttonhole type things in the top of the hat, and a kind of drawstring looking thing, much like the hat used by the assailant. Also found in the garage of the home is a duffel bag that looks very much like the duffel bag that the assailant was carrying. That's all found during the search. I'm sorry, in this timeline, again, this search occurred on the 7th. Mr. Gehrman was killed on the 2nd. His body was discovered on the 3rd by neighbors. The police came to the scene, taped it off, made sure that no one from the outside, not a real estate agent, no one, could gain access to this scene. Detective Jappy never gained access to this crime scene. Looks like we're back, so we will pick up there on the next break.
Okay.
Oh, we are not back yet. We'll stay tuned though. So, crime scene investigators show up. They take swabs of Mr. Gehrman's hands. They wrap the hands in bags. They cover his body in a body bag that is tied up, and there's some sort of a buckle, a clasp of some sort that you can tell whether it has been broken. The coroner testifies that she broke the seal on the bag. So this bag hasn't been touched from the time that it left the crime scene to the time that the coroner exposes the body. In the room with the coroner is a trainee. There's also a detective. I'm sorry, not a detective, a police officer, because physical evidence has to be collected from the body. That police officer, Mortal Clown, I do have a witness list. I've got it. I will post it in the notes after this. Oh, you mean a prospective witness list? No, I don't have that. I have a past witness list. So if you want to know all the past witnesses, I can give you that. I don't have a prospective witness list. Sorry. But that detective is there to collect physical evidence.
We're ready. You can make it down.
All right, we are back now. So we'll pick up there a little later.
Oh, did we take this off? Let's see. Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated.
Thank you. Sorry for the break, Mr. Aguero. We were discussing this slide, the 2022 media locations, and you were telling us what this was.
Yeah, this slide here is looking at the locations that were found on the cell phone when I reviewed the Celebrite extraction report. All of the locations came from basically media, photos or videos that were stored on the phone. Typically, when you take a photograph, most modern phones will get the latitude, longitude, so it'll give you a location where the photo was taken. So this is just looking at all the media that was found on the phone. And there were the little orange dots is the actual latitude and longitude reported on the media. And again, there's basically 3 locations where they're all kind of bunched together. The bulk of them is in the upper left near the Spanish Steps Lane location, and that's in January. Had 124 pictures or videos taken at that location. There was one at the bottom of the page taken in September, and then there was one on the right taken in March. Again, this is just strictly from media locations, and the media could be some that the phone took itself, or it could be some that were sent via text message or downloaded from social media or some other online site. And that's basically what we're looking at.
Now, you had prepared a report just a couple of days ago and had sent it to the parties involved, correct?
Yes.
And that presentation was not in the PowerPoint presentation, it was basically slides, fair to say?
Correct, yes.
I'm going to show you defense proposed exhibits C3 and D3. I may approach the witness. If you could review these 2 documents and tell me if you recognize them.
Yes, I do.
We can move this down to the additional. Now, in reference to these 2, is there any correlation between these 2 exhibits and what we're seeing on the screen?
Yes. This first one, C3, it was looking at all of the locations found on the phone, and they range from 2009 all the way through 2022. There was quite a bit of location, so we have a lot more dots throughout the map.
And if I could publish, Your Honor?
Okay.
And if we could bring this up on the overhead? This is Defense Exhibit C3. If you could please explain to us, again, this is just a much broader time frame.
Yes, it's, again, it's from 2009 through 2022, so there's several years worth of records and locations. And again, each of the dots represents 1 or more locations that were found at where the dot is.
Okay. Turning your attention to what's been marked and admitted, please. Yes, if you could explain to us this document.
Yes, this one, B3, is just looking at the time frame of August 1st through August 31st, 2022, and it doesn't have any dots on the map because there were no locations found on the phone for that month.
If I may publish this. And you're saying no locations, is this in reference to media locations?
Well, just any locations that are found on the phone. The first one that we looked at were all strictly media location. This last one from 2009 through 2022 were all the locations found. From memory, I don't recall if they're strictly media or if there's other forms of location. The form will keep a variety of locations in its memory.
Has there been any change in your evaluation of the data that was presented to you?
No.
There was a slide that we had addressed concerning
All right, I'm a little confused as to that last slide. So, what was he saying regarding there's no locations on the phone at all for August of 2022? Was that just media? It seems like he's saying it wasn't just media, it was no locations. That means Robert Tellis's phone was just off in August of 2022. That's it's not pinging anywhere. I'm confused because we've seen evidence that it was pinging somewhere while the police were investigating him. So I can somebody maybe have a better indication of what that slide was showing or what he's saying it was showing?
Oh, the September 2nd, 2022 data. I'm sorry, the September 2nd, 2022 data. Recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Again, there's been no change in your testimony or opinions through the course of your evaluation of this data.
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
You know, I think I'm gonna use mine. It's okay.
Absolutely.
If I can have a second just to set up the car. Mind if I, Robert, can you clear your laptop?
No, absolutely.
That's awkward. Maybe should I just use the PowerPoint, the current PowerPoint you sent me? Because it just says, so we don't have to toggle over. Absolutely. Thanks. Can we cue over? All right. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Good. So, just to be clear, this is the PowerPoint presentation that you just presented the jury this morning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. It would be accurate to say that this report, the one that we saw today, was produced on August 21st. That would be today at 10:21 a.m. Does that sound about right?
Well, actually, this report was created last night. I copied it to a thumb drive this morning to bring it over.
Okay. So last night you created it, but this morning at 10:21 a.m. you sent that out, correct?
Well, I brought it on a thumb drive and gave it to the attorney, and that's probably when he copied. I gave it to him a few minutes before that.
Okay, understood. And just to be clear, this was not the first report that you produced, correct?
No, it's not.
Okay, and I'm going to show opposing counsel. It's already in previously marked as 373. May I approach the witness? Let the record reflect I'm showing the witness. Sir, I want you to take a look at stage proposed 373. Take a quick minute, flip through it.
So here's the problem with it. Him having created this last night. All of the information that he needed to create this existed in 2022. We didn't look at anything from 2023. We didn't look at anything from 2024. Meaning he had more than ample time to create this report, but he doesn't create it until last night, and then he gives it to the prosecution today. What that tells me is the prosecution has only had hours, if that, because we're 3 hours behind in Vegas, hours to analyze this information and prepare for their cross-examination. And they're probably about to eviscerate this guy. Let's see.
And let me know if you recognize it.
Yes, it looks like the original PowerPoint or the original presentation that was prepared.
And that's a fair and accurate depiction of that original report, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
At this time, we'd ask that State's Proposed 373 be admitted into evidence.
No objection.
Thank you very much. Okay, sir, so let's do this. I want to pick up where he left off at the end. So when we look at the end of your presentation, and we get to slides 15 and 16, 15 says celebrate locations, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And then this one focuses.
He's got a prior report. There's two reasons that an expert would create two reports. One, the defense asked him to change the report because it's not as beneficial as they would like. Two, because the expert is changing his opinions with respect to the report and has to create a report that substantiates his newer opinions. So we're seeing the old report. I can't imagine that this goes well for the defense. This is about to be bad.
Is on media locations, is that correct?
Well, it focuses on all the locations from 2022 that were on the phone.
Well, it's specifying media locations.
They were all media locations.
Okay. And that is with respect to Mr. Tellis's phone that was forensically downloaded, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, if we could cue over to the Elmo. Thank you. So this is, as we can see here, that's marked as slide 14, correct? And it
Yes.
says celebrate locations, is that right?
Yes.
When we turn to this slide, you were providing us a range of history from 2009 to 2022, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And each one of those orange dots symbolizes location data being spit out by that phone that's contained on the forensic download of the phone. Would that be correct?
Correct, yes.
And just to be clear, when we look at this map, that's not all of Las Vegas. It's just a section of Las Vegas, correct?
Correct.
And it's the section of Las Vegas that contains the defendant's house. Is that right?
Yes.
I don't know if you know that or not, but at least it contains Spanish Steps. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Were you aware that's where the defendant lived?
I learned it in the last couple of days.
Okay. It includes an address of Bronze Circle, and you wouldn't have any reason to disagree with me that potentially is well, it's not potentially, it is the victim's home in this case.
I'll take your word.
All right. And it also includes, I believe, well, it doesn't have any Planet Fitness landmarks on this slide, correct?
Correct.
And so that is a 13-year snapshot of this section of the city regarding location data found on that phone.
Correct.
Let's talk about location data for a second on a phone. If you, for example, if you send a phone, if you take a picture on a phone, sometimes phones will actually capture where exactly you took that picture, correct?
Yes, most modern phones will capture the latitude, longitude, sometimes the altitude of where the photo was taken.
And so when phones are, for example, created on a phone and that's captured in Celebrite, you can capture location data showing, oh, I can see where, that would be a plot point potentially, correct?
Correct.
But apps are a way that location data can be generated from a Celebrite download, correct?
Well, apps can generate location and be stored on the phone, and then Celebrite would download that app location.
So for example, like Waze, the app Waze,
Correct.
Right? It shows you which way to go. You can turn on your location services, and then if you had turned it on and your phone is downloaded, Celebrite could collect what Waze following you, correct?
Correct.
Google Maps is the same way, correct?
Yes.
I mean, even like Chick-fil-A can follow, hey, we'd like to know where you are. You can tell Chick-fil-A, hey, you can follow me anytime I'm walking around, correct?
There's a million apps that will follow people, yes.
So the owner of the phone has a lot of control over who's watching, where they're going with their phone, because they control turning on location information, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so all you're doing is trying to see what location information was left, right?
Correct.
And when we look at a 13-year snapshot of Mr. Tellis's phone. We get all those dots for that section, correct?
Yes,
This slide was not in the newest presentation, correct?
no, the newest presentation I was requested, since there is quite a bit of data, narrow it down to 2022, and that's what I did last night.
Understood. So the answer to my question was no. This slide was not in the new presentation, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right, so now let's turn to the original report. Let's go to slide 16. Sir, if you could, please read the header of the slide.
August 1 through 31st, 2022, no locations.
No locations. So if I'm understanding this slide correctly, you decided to look at how much location data is on Mr. Tellis's phone for the month of August of 2022, correct?
Correct,
Your map focuses on Bronze Circle as well as his house, correct?
correct,
And there's not a single plot point, correct?
correct,
When we look at the 13 years, there's tons of plot points, right?
yes,
But the month of August, dead silent.
correct.
Sir, an owner of the phone has the ability to turn off location information, correct?
That is correct. You can turn off location history at any point.
And you don't just have the power to turn off a particular app. You can literally just turn the phone off and then it goes dark, right?
If you turn the phone off, then it will not record anything.
So if you want to go to Bronze Circle, but you don't want someone to see you, you can simply just turn off the phone, right?
That is possible, yes.
You could go through every single one of your apps that have location information and you could turn those off as well if you wanted to leave your phone on, right?
That is correct.
The power is in the holder of the phone, correct?
Yes,
And this is Mr. Tellis's phone.
yes.
And that month, and here's the thing, when you reviewed this case, do you know the day that Mr. Gehrman died?
I have no idea, sir.
Okay, so if I told you it was September 2nd, you have no reason to dispute that.
No, I don't. I don't know the date.
Okay, but just to be clear, the month before Mr. Gehrman dies, he's got no location data on his phone
That's correct.
for that area.
Correct.
So, I want to turn back to, could we cue over to his like modern presentation than the most recent one? Thank you. All right, so let's look at, sorry, I'm getting confused looking at this presentation thing here. All right, so the 702-533-1858. You reviewed the subscriber information on this, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and just to be clear, 702-533-1858, according to the T-Mobile records, the subscriber is Robert Tellis, correct?
correct, yes.
Okay. So when you looked at the cell phone records and the pen register, it was all affiliated with Mr. Tellis's cell phone, correct?
Correct.
Okay. When we look at this slide here, August 1st through August 16th, when we look at this information, again, these are just plot points of the phone interacting with a tower. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just to be clear, this does not deal with September 2nd. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And
So in the month of August, the towers say his phone was on because it's communicating with the towers. But he's nowhere to be found because there's no plot points showing him far to the south of his house, down at a different tower than the ones that ping when he's around his house. But he's not anywhere, apparently. Oh, the defense is not doing well.
And also, just to be clear, if I didn't want to interact with a tower, so when we look at historical records, isn't it true that when you see the tower data, that's because of if a phone called, let's say a phone called my phone, and I picked it up and I answered it, that connection using a cell tower pops up in the record, right?
That is correct, yes.
You would agree with me that if I turn my phone off, there's not going to be a plot point of where my phone is because my phone is not talking to a cell tower, correct?
No, if you turn your phone off, there would be a record of a call coming in, going to voicemail, and there would not be a cell tower.
Right, so when we look at, if we look at August 1st through August 16th, And we see like bronze circle, there doesn't appear to be a tower that the phone is interacting, right?
Correct.
But let's just say if I turned off my phone and I went to bronze circle, it doesn't matter how many times someone calls me, it's never going to show up in the records, right?
Correct.
Because I controlled whether or not someone could see me through that tower information, right?
If you turn it off, there will be no record. Yes.
Right, because the holder of the phone controls the information, right? In terms of tower data, right?
Well,
Put it another way. If I don't want any tower records of my movement, all I have to do is hit the power button and turn it off, right?
yes, you can turn it off, and then there would be no record on any record from the phone company.
So all of the information that we get.
Mr. Tejas actively turned off his location tracking software on his phone, even though his phone was on for the entire month before this crime took place. He turned off his location data for the prior, 13 years, 11 years, however long that was. He'd been pinged all over the place, but for that 1 month, he decided he was going to actively turn off any location tracking systems on his phone. Not turn his phone off, just the location tracking.
To this is tied to whether or not the holder of the phone wants to keep his phone on or off, correct?
These is showing all the times that the phone is on.
So the
period.
answer to my question is what? It all depends on whether or not the holder of the phone wants to have his location data out there, right?
Well, it depends on whether the owner of the phone wants to have communications with the phone.
Correct. And if Mr. Tellis didn't want to have his communication out there, he could simply turn it off, and you wouldn't be able to see the movement of his phone as it interacts with towers because it can't, correct?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay, and just to be clear, during this month of August, at least for this 2-week period, there's no tower interaction near Brown Circle, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Again, similarly, we see this is the same logic, right? So you've got these pings, but it's dependent on the phone being on to communicate with those towers. Is that right?
Yes.
Moving on to slide 5. This is kind of a tower near Planet Fitness, correct? So this is on 8/5. So this is not the day of the murder, is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know the date of the
It's
murder.
9/2, so it's not 9/2, correct?
Correct.
So we're looking at we're looking in that 2-week window in August, right?
Correct.
Okay. We're looking at 8/28. That's not on 9/2, is it?
Correct.
Let's move on. Let's talk about 9/2. So on 9/2 here, you are indicating that there are data sessions from 1:30 in the morning to 6:44, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and it's interacting at a cell site tower kind of nearby Spanish Steps, right?
Correct.
So this is not incoming or outgoing, is that right?
It's strictly data sessions.
Right, and I think you said, the phone acts passively, right?
It can be active or it can be passive.
And so like people go to sleep and your phone could still be communicating with a tower through a data session. Would that be right?
Yes.
Okay. 6 a.m. to 6:45 to 6:50. Again, these are all data sessions, right?
Correct.
So no outgoing messages or voice calls from this phone, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now we're looking at, this is a very big window of time. We've got 7:09 a.m. to 3:47. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it looks like you're trying to parse out what things are. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just separating the pen register data from the voice, text, and data.
And just to be clear, one of the things I saw on an earlier slide that you don't have here is you don't denote on this slide if the text messages are incoming or outgoing, correct?
That is correct.
And you don't denote if the voice calls are incoming or outgoing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'd like to publish, you've read those pen registers. I'd like to publish Exhibit 345. Hold on. Let me bring this over. You're familiar with these records, correct?
Yes.
Oh, wait, this is the wrong one. Hold on a second. well, just so we can see this, this is the subscriber records, right?
Correct, it
That's
is.
how we can see it's Mr. Tellis and it's over at Spanish Steps, is that right?
Correct.
All right, so I'm now publishing the pen register records. This is what they look like, correct?
Correct.
And essentially, when we look at category A, that's kind of plotting an event, right? Or like an entry point, right? Is that correct?
Column A, I believe it's just like a case number.
Okay, thank you. Column B is the number, right?
Correct.
And that's Mr. Tellis's number, is that right?
Yes,
Column D is the date, is that true?
correct.
And call type is whether it's a voice or a text or if it's a data session, right?
Correct.
And direction is outgoing and ingoing, correct?
Correct.
Incoming. Sir, I just want to turn your attention to the end of these registers. And just so we're clear, when we were looking at your presentation before and you were mapping out the data sessions, the incoming, well, you didn't do incoming outcome, but you had text messages and voice, that was being pulled from these records that we see here, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just want to get to, oh, there's a glare and I can't see the scroll button, sorry. Let me. Okay. So, do you see this entry point here? For the record, it's 45556. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, sir.
And I think you're familiar with this. Isn't it true that this is for the morning of September 2nd, this is the last outgoing text for a while. Would that be correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and it's outgoing and it's at 8:48, right?
Correct, yes.
And we look at that other slide, when we look at, so when we're looking at, there it is, right? That's up at the top, right? The very first entry, that's an outgoing text message, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So let's go back to these records. So when we start to look after 8:48, you're getting tons of outgoing data, which is kind of, as you testified to, a passive function of a phone, correct?
Can be, yes.
But then you start getting text messages, right? So here's one at 9:16, right?
Correct.
That's incoming though, right?
Correct.
There's another one at 9:16:03, another incoming text, correct?
Correct.
9:16:04, an incoming text, correct?
Yes.
9:26, another incoming text, correct?
Correct.
And this phone is not responding. It's not sending an outgoing text yet. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
We have another incoming text at 9:44. Is that right?
Correct.
Another incoming text at 9:44. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
We have another one. So we've got 1, 2, 3, all within 9:44:53. Incoming text after incoming text, correct?
Yeah, just to clear up, when you have the same time frame, it typically is one large message that's broken down into smaller segments, so it's not necessarily multiple messages. Just so it's clear.
Understood. And so we see this bulk, there's one message coming at 9:44, but it's not responded to immediately, correct?
Correct, yes.
And then at 10:16, we have another text message, right?
Correct, incoming.
And then 1 second later, so the first one's at 10:16:29, the next one's at 10:16:30, another text message, right?
Again, they could be separate, it could be one long message broken down.
Okay, so we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all being recorded by this phone, right?
Correct.
And there's no immediate response back, right?
Correct.
Then we see at 10:35, nearly 15 minutes later, another text message comes in, or actually nearly 20 minutes later, another text message comes in, right?
Correct.
And there's no outgoing response. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Now at 10:43, there's 2 voice calls. Isn't that right?
Incoming, correct.
Incoming. So people are now calling the phone, right?
Yes,
It's followed up by an incoming text message, right?
correct.
We then
So that's that incoming voice right there at 10:43:04. Let me make it bigger on you all.
now we're almost at 30 minutes later. We have 2 more phone calls coming in, correct?
Correct. Again, that, I believe, is one actual call. They're within a couple seconds.
Understood. Seems to be the same number, 2 seconds off. But nonetheless, someone is calling that phone 30 minutes after those last text messages, right?
That is correct, yes.
And yet, nothing is going out of that phone. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And then we just have tons of passive outgoing data activity, getting us to about 1:20. Isn't that right?
Yes,
And once again, at 1:20, more incoming calls. Isn't that right?
that is correct.
Or it might just be one call, right? Because it's at the same time, same number. Would that be fair?
Yes,
All right. And then we have just a minute and 15 seconds later, another incoming text, right?
correct.
And then there's another incoming text 2 seconds later. Maybe it's from the same place. Who knows? But we've got another record of it. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And then we have an incoming text from a completely different number. Isn't that true?
Correct.
We have got more. So 2 more coming from that number. Isn't that right?
Again, it could be one long message or multiple messages, all incoming.
Right. But the bottom line is people keep reaching out to this phone. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And we're not seeing a response going out from this phone, are we?
Correct.
Now we get to 122. There's another incoming text. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And it appears to be a series from this number.
Correct.
Right? There's 3 of them here. We get another incoming text message at 126 from a completely different number. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And yet the phone never sends an outgoing message, does it?
Not during this time, no.
Then we move on to 205. Finally, we have an outgoing text. Isn't that right?
Correct.
So from 8:48 in the morning to 2:05 p.m. on the day that Mr. Garriman is murdered, no outgoing texts are being sent from Robert Tellis's phone. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And there is not a single outgoing phone call from Mr. Tellis's phone at that time. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Any redirect?
Thank you. In reference to these messages, we'll keep this up. We don't know if it's actual people concerning this incoming data. It could be spam, correct?
It could be anything without looking at a cell phone extraction that has the copy of the messages or the message being saved through the phone company. It could be anything. We don't know.
Okay, so it would
It could be spam. Let's blame it on the rain. I don't know. Let's just throw anything out there, because at this point you've been eviscerated by the prosecution, and everything that you said while I was standing up here questioning you has been called into question, and you're pretty much a witness for the prosecution at this point. But sure, let's blame it on spam.
be speculating to say all these people are reaching out and trying to get a hold of this person during this period of time, and he's just not responding. Fair to say?
Again, all we know is that messages are coming into the phone. Some of these are multiple. It could be one longer message broken down. Who they're coming from without checking the numbers and see who.
Anybody want to bet that the prosecution has checked into who those numbers are, where those phone numbers are coming from? Let's see if they come back on redirect and address that.
That person is, I have no idea.
So again, and you had said multiple times during cross, this could just be a large message. It doesn't mean that multiple times a person's trying to submit or transfer information.
Yeah, text messages are SMS, short message service. They go in small increments, 160 characters. So on your phone, you can type a long letter. When you hit send for transmission purposes, that gets broken down into 160 character segments and transmitted. So on the records, you see multiple messages, but it's actually one long message. So these can be one, or they could be multiple.
Okay, so again, to make the characterization, these are multiple times during this time. It's not particularly accurate. It could be one long message. Fair to say?
Correct, yes.
And I moved this up courtesy, but I'd like to address the last slide, please. Yes, yes, thank you. Bring this up. Turn your attention to the 2022 media locations, and previously there was a number of questions carrying a longer span of time, 2009 to 2022.
Correct. one media location found in September. The other months, there was no location found in that area on the phone.
Same question on the right, the middle box right here.
Again,
Middle of the
it's-
screen to the right.
is-
Again, if you could please go through the months and explain the significance of that.
Yeah. Again, looking at the media location for the entire year, there was only one media that had location in March in that area. The other months, there was no location whatsoever on the phone.
Again, much to do about nothing. I mean, this shows that apparently the media location part of the cell phone was not being utilized.
Well, media location is when you actually take a photograph. Someone takes a photograph. The phone didn't have any other locations stored on it, such as Google locations or from apps or from any other source whatsoever. So the lack of location, there just wasn't any on the phone. And there are phones that don't store a whole lot of locations.
Okay, so obviously fair to say that based upon your experience in this area, people change their cell phones. People purchase new ones.
Yes, and then each model and each make stores data differently. Some store more locations. It depends what apps you use on your phone. Some will store more locations, others don't. The accuracy of the location can vary tremendously. So there's a lot of issues to take into account.
If I were to tell you that there was evidence, and obviously you weren't called upon to give an opinion concerning that, concerning newspaper articles, concerns in May. Again, looking at this analysis of these three for the media locations, we don't see anything going on in May, do we?
No, we don't.
We don't see anything going on in June, July, August, correct?
Correct.
We do have down here at the lower location, a media location concerning September of 1.
Correct.
Fair to say that based upon your analysis of this phone, there's not a change. It's consistent basically month in to month out, perhaps except for January of 2022.
Yes, it is pretty consistent throughout the year that there's not a whole lot of locations stored on the phone.
And again, the change in the report isn't material. Doesn't concern your conclusions. It's just to make the presentation simpler.
Correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any recross?
I do. There's Mark. Please. One more thing. Thank you very much. Sir, you remember at the beginning of cross-examination or redirect examination, you were asked a question about substantively what's going on with those text messages. And I think you said, oh, you might have to speculate. You'd really need to look into Celebrate and study the messages, correct?
If you want to get the content, whether it's one long message or multiple small messages, yes.
And just to be clear, you did look at the content of the text messages on this phone as part of your work, isn't that correct?
No, sir, that wasn't one of the items that was requested of me.
Okay, I'm showing opposing counsel, which is marked Exhibit 375. Thank you. May I approach? Sir, do you recognize what I'm about to hand you? This is State Proposed 375.
Yes,
Okay, please take a look at both pages.
yeah, this is a report that I wrote back on August 17th.
You wrote that. That's a fair and accurate depiction of your report?
It is,
Okay, and you prepared that in conjunction with producing the original PowerPoint presentation that I kind of had and showed you, correct?
yes.
Okay. At this time, we'd ask for admission of State's Proposed 375.
You could approach me.
Please don't tell me that you're lying about whether or not you looked into the content of these text messages, because you're an expert and the jury has to trust your opinions. So if you get on the stand and lie, well, now the jury can't trust your opinions anymore. It sounds like whatever the prosecution just gave to the witness is evidence that he did in fact look into the content of these text messages and The witness said, I didn't look into the content of these text messages.
Permission to publish. Can we cue over to the Elmo? Thank you so much. Publishing Exhibit 375. All right, sir. So we can see that okay?
Yes,
All right, so that's dated August 17th, correct?
correct.
And you state in here that you were requested to analyze pen register records, correct?
Correct.
You also compared this IMSI to the IMSI shown on Mr. Tellis' Celebrite extraction, correct?
Correct.
And you kind of indicate that the phone was associated with, the number we've been talking about, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You were provided a Celebrite download of Mr. Tellis' phone, isn't that right?
Correct, yes.
You just testified that you did not review the content of any text messages. You did just tell us that on cross-examination, didn't you?
Correct, yes.
I want to show you now page 2. Sir, do you see these 3 entry points here?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that comes from Celebrite?
Yes, it does.
Doesn't that provide the content of the text messages?
Yes, and in this report, if you read it in its entirety, I'm just trying to confirm the time zone for the pen register, which is the whole reason for the report.
Sir, you said you didn't look at any text messages on the Celebrite download that had their content. You did testify to that just 2 minutes ago on cross-examination, recross, right?
Yes, I did not review the content of the message. I was looking at the date and time.
Okay. Okay, so you didn't study it, but you literally captured content, correct?
Yes,
I didn't look at it. I just printed it, put it in this letter that I sent out. It was there, but I didn't look at it. That's what I was saying. So I wasn't really perjuring myself. I'm saying that I didn't look at the stuff that I printed out, is what I'm saying. So it's not that I'm a liar. It's that I just don't pay attention to stuff, even though I'm an expert.
And you put it in this email, correct?
in this report, yes.
Okay, and so just to be clear, you had the text messages, the content at your disposal, right, for the day of 9/2, isn't that right?
Yes,
Okay, so I know you say, well, I could be speculating, but the bottom line is, if you had wanted to, you could have just scrolled through and looked to see if it's spam or if it's substantive, isn't that right? You could have, right?
if that had been a request made of me, I would have done it. However, I do work with what I'm requested to do.
I understand that. At this time, we're going to approach the state's proposed 374.
If I'm the defense, I want my money back. I don't want to pay this guy anymore. I want my money back.
May I approach? So I want you to take a look at this for a second. I know that you didn't prepare this, but are you familiar roughly with what you're looking at here, like what this is?
Timeline, yes, from the Celebrite extraction. Yes, I'm familiar with those. I've seen them many times.
Okay, and I'm gonna turn your attention to page 5, entries 12, 13, and 14. Based off of your cover letter that we just looked at, are you familiar with what you're looking at there?
Yeah, those are the three that I copied on my report.
Okay, does this appear to be a timeline extraction from Mr. Tellis's phone?
Correct, yes.
And this appears to be a fair and accurate depiction of data extracted from that phone from that day.
The report looks like a typical timeline report that I've seen. I'm assuming nothing was left out of it, so it appears to be a timeline report.
Okay. At this time, we're going to ask that the state's proposed 374 be admitted.
Any objections?
We could approach, please.
Sure.
So this particular request to have this admitted into evidence based on this guy's answer. This is a report. He identified it as what could be a typical report, but he didn't say that he produced it. He didn't say that this was the actual data from this person's cell phone. He might not have given enough in his response for the prosecution to be able to admit this into evidence. So that's probably what they're talking about with the judge. So we'll see what the judge does with this. But yeah, Mr. Tellis, this is likely why he was trying to represent himself, because he's probably going broke paying for this defense. This is not going well. This is now the third bad witness for the defense. And remember, when the prosecution got done, we were wondering, who can he possibly call? We're seeing now, no one.
So, you know what, if I could, I'm going to remove this staple just to make it a little easier to read. Well, I'll just leave it. Well, may I approach for a second? So I want to show you page 2. This first entry point's kind of obscured, but they have categories here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So for example, this appears to be the fourth entry. There's a 4, but the staple seems to be blocking the numbers. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So, if we're looking at this here, this entry here is from, if you could tell us, what time in the morning is that coming from?
1:31, or excuse me, 1:21 and 31 seconds a.m.
And if we look at this category here in the third column, what is it denoting?
Incoming?
And if the second column is telling us what type of data this is?
Yes, it's
And then
email.
for this entry, what is it?
Email.
All right. So let's, whoop, did I just turn that off? Of course I broke the overhead. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. I'm turning to page 5. If you could, just, oh, man, boy, focus this pips. Not having much luck here. Okay. Looking at this entry at the top of the page, if you could tell me, what is the date and time there?
8:47 a.m.
Is this incoming or outgoing?
It looks like an incoming text message.
Okay, and it's categorized as an instant message, is that right?
Yes.
Who is the message from? I don't know if you can read it.
The phone number.
Actually, at this point, I would object. This has been admitted through a different witness. It was admitted absent objection. He was not called upon to read the contents of these. That was covered by law enforcement. So, again, this is out of the scope of the direct. It's been addressed by the state. And it's
I don't know why we're doing a speaking objection. If you'd like to approach, we can.
If he's allowed to go through this exhibit, this is going to get even worse for the defense, because remember I said, I bet the prosecution has figured out who these phone numbers belong to. He's about to tell us who these phone numbers belong to. And then it's going to call into question, well, if Mr. Tellis is at home and he's receiving these text messages and these emails from these particular people, why isn't he responding? So the defense definitely does not want this to continue. They want this witness off the stand as soon as possible. Go back home to Washington State. You've been singularly unhelpful to us. You've likely helped the prosecution. So please return home at your earliest possible convenience. The prosecution has done an excellent job in this case. They are putting on a masterclass here. And the defense just can't keep up. I don't know if it's because they got onto the case late. I don't know if it's because they were just dealt a very bad hand. It could be a combination of both of those things. Nothing is going right for the defense here.
So, at 8:47, who sends Mr. Tellis a text message?
It's from 702-672-8556, and the name on the contacts is Olivia Tellis.
Okay, so that's at 8:47, and the request is what?
The message, what
Yeah.
it says?
Yep.
Can I go to croquet club today? It ends around 4.
All right, I'd like to read the next entry. How quickly is there a response? What's the time of the response, sir?
8:48 and 6 seconds a.m.
So the owner of the phone responds.
Wait. Is his wife named Olivia? Because if she's at home and she's texting him to ask, can I go to croquet club? That means he's not at home. So this could be really, really, really bad for Mr. Tellis. Let's just keep going.
Is that correct? Based on this entry. It's from who? Olivia Tellis or the owner?
From the owner of the phone to Olivia Tellis.
And what's the answer?
Okay, go ahead.
So within a minute, the owner of the phone responds, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If you could read the next incoming instant message. Is this from Olivia again?
It's from Olivia at 8:48 and 19 seconds a.m.
Okay. And then there's a response, right? All right, thank you, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now we see there's another incoming email, is that right?
Correct.
At the top of this document, do we see another incoming email?
Correct.
I'm going to try to maybe zoom out just a little bit to make it a little bit easier. Now we see entry number 17. This is a lot easier to see over here. Entry number 17. There is another incoming instant message, correct?
Correct.
We have, and it appears to be maybe like almost like a spam message or something like that, correct?
I haven't read it, so
Okay.
I can take the time to read it if you like.
It's okay. Looking at entry 18, it's another incoming message, is that correct?
Correct.
It's from Macy's, is that right?
So again, I haven't read these, so I can sit down and read them to answer
Okay.
your questions.
Again, I object to his reading the messages. I mean, he was not brought in for that purpose. It was the location.
No, I'm trying to just move it along. Isn't it true it says Macy's on there?
Again, so I haven't read them, so I don't know what it says.
Sir, I
can
understand,
take the
but
time to read
image
them
is
if you
right in
like.
front- I understand that, but the image is right in front of you.
Okay, so would you like me to read it? I haven't
Sure.
read the message.
Go ahead.
Well, number 17, I don't see Macy's on there.
Sir, it's entry 18.
Oh, I thought you were talking about 17.
No, it just says, it appears to be like a Macy's spam text, correct? Like, hey, you get
Yes.
25 to 6% off, right? Something like that. Additionally, entry number 19, there seems to be another incoming instant message, isn't that right?
Yes, they're actually just native messages, not instant messages.
Okay, and I was only basing that off of this column here saying instant message. What's the difference between native message and instant message?
Native messages are when you use your phone's native text message application. Instant messages typically are associated with iPhones, where one iPhone communicates with another iPhone, and the message goes through Apple. For Celebrite purposes, they bunch them all together under the category instant messages. But again, if you look at the source, it says native messages.
And to be clear, Mr. Tellis' phone is a Google Pixel phone, isn't that right?
Correct.
All right. Moving on to page 7. There seems to be a text message incoming from a number. Can you please read out what that number is?
Okay, can you pull
Sure,
it down just
I
a little bit?
apologize, yeah.
Okay, it's another message incoming.
Okay. It indicates that it's a pending assignment, is that correct?
It says caseworker pending assignments.
Thank
Again,
you.
I haven't read the message.
Moving here, there's another, the next one is what, an email that comes in?
An email, correct.
We have another incoming message from 855-712-0964, is that correct?
Correct.
We have another incoming text message from 702-858-1693, is that right?
Correct.
There then is a second message from the exact same number, isn't that right?
I'm sorry, I'm seeing
Entry number
one.
24 appears to be a second a second native message from 702-858-1693. Is that correct?
Well, they're dated the same time, so I believe it's the same message we're looking at.
Okay.
There's two
There's two
images.
entry I'll put this, there's 2 entry points on this report, is that right?
Correct.
All right. And then there appears to be a call, is that correct? An incoming call,
Correct. There's an incoming call.
And what is the significance of the 00000?
There was no duration on the call, so someone that called and
Not picked up.
not picked up.
Moving to page 9. Now we're at about 10:49 a.m. Apparently we have an incoming email, is that correct?
Correct.
We have another incoming call, correct, at 11:16.
Yes.
Again, it has the 000, so that means that call wasn't answered, isn't that right?
Not answer correct.
We have another incoming email from Samsung, is that right?
Yes.
That's at 11:30 in the morning,
11:28.
11:28, I'm sorry. Moving on to page 9. Appears to be some type of calendar entry. Moving to entry number 30, there's another incoming email, is that correct?
Correct.
That appears to be coming from Peacock or NBC, would that be fair?
Yes.
Peacock TV, right, is that their subscriber, they're like the streaming service. There's a calendar appointment that pops up here, is that right?
Correct.
We have a user account, something regarding Clark County SharePoint, is that right?
Correct.
We have another incoming call coming in at 1:20:29, isn't that right?
Yes.
Is that phone call answered?
Not on the Celebrate report now.
Okay. By 1:20, there's another call log at 1:21, is that right?
I can't see that far down.
Understood. Sorry.
Yes, there's the call at 1:21.
Okay. And there's an instant message that's incoming as well, is that right?
Correct.
And it's at 1:21:50, is that right?
Correct.
Turning to page 11. We have another incoming text message, is that right?
Correct.
As of 1:21:53, we have another incoming text message, is that right?
Correct.
At 1:22:37, we have another incoming text message.
Correct.
At 1:26, we have another incoming text message, is that right?
Correct.
And then at 2:05, we have an outgoing text message, correct?
I can't see the bottom of the
Sorry
page.
about that. We have an outgoing text message at that point, right?
At 2:05, yes.
Okay, and just to be clear, that first text message comes in from that number, 702-325-2821 at 1:26, isn't that correct?
Correct.
And we don't get a response until 2:05 p.m., isn't that right?
Yes,
Responding
correct.
to that same number, isn't that right?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions to this witness.
I can have that.
Sure.
Mr. O'Gara, there have been a number of questions concerning the events of September 2nd, where the state had asked you that people kept trying to reach out to Mr. Tellis and that there was no response, correct?
Correct.
Remember the testimony that you had given that these could have been automated? That
Correct.
could be data texts, things of that nature.
Correct.
That's pretty much confirmed what you had said, has it not?
Yes, a lot of those seem to be junk.
They're junk,
Yes.
automated junk, fair to say?
Yes.
So again, that he's trying to be reached out and he's not responding because he's supposedly or the inference is he's doing something nefarious, how often do you respond to junk messages?
I don't. I just put them in the junk folder and delete.
So it's fair to say on the morning and early afternoon of September 2nd, he was receiving a lot of junk messages,
It appears that way, yes.
and he wasn't responding to them, correct?
Correct.
So that's consistent with what your testimony has been.
Yes.
If I could have this brought up, it's currently on the laptop, it's the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint, please. And this will go back to the jury. Again, this just confirms there was a bunch of junk messages they were receiving on that morning.
Correct.
Say? You were asked to review the phone contents and the activity to determine a pattern of behavior. Fair to say?
A pattern of locations where the phone is located at various times.
Correct. And the testimony and the data that you've been provided has been consistent with that request.
Correct.
There are a number of questions concerning the gym based upon your review of August at least. There was activity, the location activity, which is what you're testifying today concerning.
Yes.
It's consistent. There were visits to that gym.
Yes, the gym is definitely a location where the phone could have been.
And on September 2nd, 2022, about noon, there was the data that you reviewed was consistent with that phone being in the area.
Correct.
In reference to the media locations, again, we were asked concerning the media locations, the significance of that. There was these inferences that somehow he was turning off his phone to avoid detection. It appears that for the year of 2022, these media locations concerning your analysis of the phone were fairly consistent. I mean, we have a
Yes.
big month in January.
Yes, the media locations are consistent, and as far as the phone being on or off, we have a lot of different records that show activity on the phone through the pen register, the various T-Mobile mediation data sessions, timing events. So when you have activity recorded with tower information, the phone is typically on. So you can have a gap in calls made. It doesn't mean the phone is turned off. That's a big assumption to make.
Okay, in fact, on the lower location, the middle location, we actually have a media location, data location on one in September, correct?
Correct.
The month that this crime is alleged to have occurred, fair to say?
Correct.
Whereas the other months, we don't have anything.
Correct.
And if we were to follow this line of reasoning that this was turned off to hide some activity, that would kind of contradict that idea, wouldn't it?
Yes. With that theory, it was off on the previous months when nothing was going on.
And again, concerning the contents of these messages that we have received, there is nothing that you have reviewed or you're aware of that the actions on this phone, this receipt of these automated messages was in any way inconsistent with other months. You weren't asked to review that, were you?
No, it was not.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
And one brief question based off that last. I'm okay. So you remember how he asked you about, let's talk about that theory if the phone is turned off, would these text messages be inconsistent with that? And you had indicated yes, correct?
That is consistent with it being
It'd
off?
be inconsistent.
Inconsistent, correct.
Right, but it would be consistent if you just left your phone at home, right?
Yeah, again, all I testify is where the phone is. I'm not testifying as to who had the phone.
Right, because if you left your phone on in your house, you could go wherever you needed to go, and no one would be able to track your movements through your phone, correct?
Correct.
And additionally, people could still be trying to reach out to you, right?
In theory, you could, yes.
Right, so you picture, messages from your daughter could still show up on your phone. Messages from your wife could still show up, or calls from your wife could still show up on the phone, right?
Correct.
But if you're not at home, you're not able to answer any of those messages, correct?
That would be correct.
And just to be clear, when we look at his phone from 8:48 to 2:05, there's nothing outgoing from Mr. Tellis's phone on the day that Mr. Gehrman is murdered. Isn't that correct?
That is correct,
No
yes.
further questions.
Just in response, but the majority of those messages were automated.
Correct.
No further questions. Thank you.
Juror? You can approach.
So we may be encountering another one of those situations where the defense witnesses are unable to be found because we thought that they would be going later in the week.
Received a question from a juror. It's been marked
Oh,
as question
juror
number
question.
18. Is there any methods of taking photos with the cell phone that would not show up on a media location map?
Sir, can you repeat that one more time?
Is there any methods of taking photos with a cell phone that would not show up on a media location map?
Yes.
So here, understand the juror's question. Remember, the detective Gaddis was talking about that. I think it was a Popeyes location where there was all these pictures being taken at Popeyes, and she was basically saying it looks like somebody was doing their own little stakeout. Well, his location data was tied to media, so photographs and things being taken. And apparently during the month of August, there were all these photos that were taken off of his phone that were looked to have been taken in August, but he says there's no location data tied to any pictures that were taken in August. So the juror kind of wants to know about that. Again, the jurors are paying attention. So we're going to hear his answer. So far, his answer has been yes, there are ways that pictures can be taken without the cell phone having location data.
Yeah, there definitely is ways. If you turn the location services off on your cell phone, then you can take photographs and no location will be recorded. So the media locations are only active when your location services are turned on.
Any follow-up from the defense? The state?
Yeah, just very briefly. And you're familiar of the term the cloud, right?
Correct.
And you're also familiar with caches, correct?
Correct.
And so you could, for example, take a photograph. I don't know, I'm standing here, but you could take a picture using your camera. Maybe you could delete it, but it could go up into the cloud and it still may be captured, correct?
You can take a photograph and go up to the cloud, store it there, and you can delete it from your phone and still be stored on the cloud.
And it may not, when it's up in the cloud, it may not have, for example, location data. Would that be accurate?
It depends on which cloud service you're using. Some will strip location out of it, some leave it on there.
And sometimes if images get stored in a cache pathway, that also may not have the location information. Would that be fair?
Well, images in a cache file are temporary images. Those will never have location on them.
Okay. So it can be like you took a picture, maybe you could delete that picture, but it was cached, so it's stored away over there. So you're not going to have location information, but at some point that image was in that phone. Would that be fair?
I want to make sure we're talking the same language. When a phone takes an image, takes a photograph, you create one original image, and then you're going to find multiple smaller versions on either a cache file or in other directories of the phone, because the phone will utilize different size images. So only one is an original with latitude, longitude. The others are copies that typically don't have any metadata with regards to location.
Right. So if you found an image in a Celebrite report, and it says the pathway comes from a cache, you would agree that that's not the original image, that's just a stored away, maybe smaller image that was produced by that phone at some point. Would that be correct?
Yeah, a cache file can be a smaller image of the phone, or it could be if you go on a website, this stores images from a website. So those are all going to cache files.
Good example, like Google Maps, right? If you go to Google Maps, it might cache the images that you're looking at, maybe when you're in Street View. Would that be fair?
When you go on any online service,
So that
it
includes
would
Google Maps?
create cache images. And again, those would not have any location information, would not have date that it was taken. They're just images. Again, if they're from a website, and they're just stored in the temporary cache files.
And a lot of times with those cached images, they may have in Celebrite an indication that they're modified versus maybe an original image, it might say created. Would that be correct?
No,
Okay.
the created, modified, and accessed have nothing to do with when they were taken.
Okay.
Those dates are only when they're written to the internal memory or when they're looked at in the internal memory. The date that a photograph is taken is stored in the metadata as a date captured.
Okay, so the key is look to see that pathway. If it's cached, you're probably not going to have location services. Is that correct?
On a cache file, you will not.
Thank you.
Just to follow up.
All right, let's catch everybody up. Not only did we have the Popeye stakeout, where 100 some odd pictures of cars driving down a particular street were taken, and these images were retrieved from the phone. That happened in the month of August, toward the end of August. So we know that the phone had these images on it that were not at Mr. Tellis's house, because somebody had the phone and they were taking photographs of vehicles coming down this particular street. And that happened at about the same time that Mr. Tellis was looking up, one, where Mr. Gehrman lived, and two, what Mr. Gehrman's vehicle looked like. So when the prosecutor went back to ask about, well, I'm glad you brought up the website data and how that is stored. That wouldn't have a location associated with it, correct? Because when you're looking at a Google image and that's cached, that cache doesn't show the location. It doesn't have any metadata associated with it. And there were a whole bunch of those Google images of different vantage points of Mr. Gehrman's home, also pulled off of his cell phone. So you've got the stakeout photographing cars coming down the street at the same time that Mr. Tejas is trying to find out what kind of car Mr. Gehrman drives. And you've got all these Google images, and he's testifying, well, look, in the month of August, there's no media files on the phone that have any location services associated with them. Essentially, he's again demonstrating to the jury, who is again paying attention, that Mr. Tellis turned off his location services on his phone for the entire month of August so that his phone would not record any of his locations in the month of August. So the only data we can find to have locations are where the cell is pinging from when the cell phone is on. But yet, for the many years prior, there's all this location data associated with media files on the phone. And we know that he was taking, or someone was using his phone to take pictures during the month of August. So there should be some location data associated with an area away from Mr. Tellis's phone in the month of August if his location data was still being used, if it was still on. It was not.
Turning your attention to what's on the screen concerning this media locations app. Again, the questions concerning whether it was on or off. We're making assumptions. Are you able to give any opinion as to whether that was on or off, or there just wasn't use of the media locations aspect of this phone.
No, all we can tell from this is that in January, September, and March, there were images that had locations.
So the defense attorney is way behind the jury on this. The defense attorney is only worried about this particular slide, but the jury is thinking about all the evidence that they've been presented with. The jury is thinking about all those pictures that were taken on this phone, and those pictures aren't showing up on this data because there's nothing from the month of August on this data. The jury is way ahead of the defense attorney. The defense attorney is grasping at straws once again.
Again, the other months, there's none to speculate that it was location services turned off or something else. It's speculation.
It's nothing more, speculation, and there's no indication of any intent based upon the review of the user or the owner based upon your review of this information before you.
No, not based on just this records alone.
Thank you. No further questions.
Anything else for this witness? Mr. Hamner, anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony here
Thank you.
today. You may step down. You are excused from your subpoena. At this time, we're going to recess for lunch. During this recess, you are admonished not to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case.
So we are on lunch break. It looks like we will be picking back up at 5. That's going to be what? Lunch break till 5 p.m. Is that 8 p.m.? They're on 5 p.m. Eastern. I'm sorry. I'm thinking they're saying Nevada time. Okay. So it looks like we will be back here in about an hour. I'm going to put up another link for the afternoon session. Anybody wants to leave now, I do appreciate everybody joining us for the morning session of day number 6. But let's get back to the evidence that the jury has already been presented with. And we were at the point where we were talking about the evidence that was collected from the scene of the crime and the chain of custody of this evidence. So the scene of the crime was roped off. Nobody from any real estate company, Detective Jappy, nobody was there to have tampered with any of this evidence. The coroner unseals the body bag. There's gloves on the hands of the decedent, and the lab assistant testifies that she removed the gloves from the hand of the decedent. The officer that was in the room with the coroner and the lab assistant testifies that she's holding an envelope underneath the hands of the decedent as the lab assistant is cutting the nails of the decedent. One hand, all the nails from one hand go in one envelope. All the nails from the other hand go in a different envelope. Both of those envelopes are sealed. Those sealed envelopes are placed into a larger envelope. That envelope is sealed. That envelope is labeled. Both of the smaller envelopes were labeled too. That larger envelope is labeled. And apparently in this evidence collection room where the body is, there's a chute. They place the larger the police officer places the larger envelope into a chute. That chute leads directly to the evidence locker. No evidence can leave the evidence locker without supervisory access. So a supervisor with the police department is the only one who can sign out the evidence. There's a log. On that log, it shows who signed out the evidence and when. Now, at the time that they collect the fingernails from the decedent, they don't have Robert Tejas' DNA in order to compare any DNA that may be under the decedent's fingernails. Okay? The decedent's fingernails are processed. There are 2 sets of DNA on found when those fingernails are processed, both from males. One of them is, of course, the DNA of the decedent. One of them is run through every database that these officers have access to, federal, state, and county databases, to see if there's anybody in the system that this DNA matches to. They find nobody. Nobody's DNA has ever been collected by the federales, by the state police, by the county police, that matches the DNA that was collected from the decedent's fingernails. And remember, they still don't have Robert Tellis's DNA. Okay. They also collect his clothes, thus placed in evidence. You know, there's a lot that's placed into evidence. The coroner testifies that there's defensive wounds on the decedent, indicating that there was likely a struggle. Okay. So we've got that from the crime scene. There's testimony that the decedent has his wallet with cash in it, still on his person. His car keys, still on his person. His garage door is open, according to his neighbors, after the crime took place. They are the ones who went and closed the garage. So the vehicle is accessible, and his car keys are on his person because he exited the garage through the garage door, and then he was attacked. So the garage is open. The assailant has access to the car keys and the car. The car's still there. Car keys still there. There's no forced entry in the home. No indication that the assailant went into the home. There's video surveillance footage of this entire event. And from the video, the assailant never enters the home. So this isn't a robbery. The assailant lies in wait, doesn't take anything. Apparently, the assailant is specifically there to commit the crime that was committed, which is the killing of the decedent. It looks like this was an assassination. Like somebody decided that they were going to kill the only reporter to have been killed in the continental United States in all of 2022. So at Mr. Tellis's house, a couple of days later, they gather things that they just keep pointing to. Perhaps this was exactly what was worn by the assailant when this crime took place. Tejas has a vehicle that looks markedly similar. He's got shoes that look markedly similar. He's got a hat that's cut up that looks markedly similar. The shoes are all cut up too. Looks like somebody's maybe destroying evidence. And he's got a bag that looks markedly similar. They don't find the orange vest with the reflectors. And they don't find the dark colored pants. But they have Mr. Tejas. They take pictures of his person. Again, he's got the injury to his finger. They take a buccal swab from Mr. Tejas. This is on the 7th. They take a buccal swab. When they're collecting the evidence at his home, there's a patrol officer at the door, making sure nobody that shouldn't be involved in this investigation is getting in. A couple of people, notably, don't come. Nobody from Compass Realty comes to the home. And one Detective Jappy does not come to Mr. Tellis's home when all of this evidence is being collected. In fact, Mr. Jappy is with Mr. Tellis. They take the buccal swab. The lab immediately processes Mr. Tellis's DNA. And lo and behold, when they compare Mr. Tellis's DNA from the buccal swab to the unidentified DNA found on the person of Mr. Gehrman, found days in advance of them collecting Mr. Tellis's DNA, there's a match. That match is, within, it's billions of times more likely that this is Robert Tellis's DNA than any other human being in the world. Billions of times more likely. So they say, okay, we've let him go back to his house. Now we got to go arrest him because he wasn't arrested before. We got to arrest him now because the DNA matches, right? Makes sense. We collected all this stuff from his house that looks like the stuff used in this crime. And now we've got a DNA match. And he has access to a vehicle that looks just like the one that the assailant used. Yeah, we got to go arrest him. So who do they get? Well, Detective Jappy was investigating the public administrator's office. And so he had prior contact with Robert Tellis. And they had developed what Detective Jappy called a rapport. So they get Detective Jappy to call Mr. Tellis and try to get him to exit his home peaceably so that they can effectuate the arrest. During that phone call, Mr. Tellis indicates to us, or to the police, that he's likely to injure himself. So the call is kind of escalated, and they need somebody who is, proficient at talking people down off the ledge, trained in that sort of thing. So who do they get? Well, the guy on the phone with Mr. Tellis, because Detective Jappy is trained in talking people down off the wall. He's been doing it for 3 years, I believe he said. So Detective Jappy spends 2 hours on the phone with Robert Tellis, who ends up in his bathtub, stuck apparently in his bathtub. They've got SWAT surrounding his home. They send a robot in. The robot can't make it through. Somehow the robot gets up the stairs, but it can't make it through. There's a mess in the bedroom. The robot can't make it through the mess. So they send in a drone. The drone identifies Robert Tellis in the bathtub. So now they know that it is safe to enter the home because Robert Tellis does not have a gun or anything. So he's not trying to commit suicide by cop or anything like that. So they are able to effectuate this arrest. At no point does Detective Jappy enter the home because he's outside on the phone with Mr. Tellis the entire time. He does ride in the ambulance to the hospital to which Mr. Tellis is taken. But he does so with paramedics, fire members of the fire department, several others who are also in this ambulance. And there is absolutely no evidence that anything untoward happened during this ride. They then begin to analyze Mr. Tellis's phone records and find that his cell phone on the day of the incident is only pinging at his home. So theoretically, he's home the entire time, but they notice, of course, that, well, it's only receiving incoming communications from 8:45 a.m. until 2 something p.m. This entire time, there's no outgoing anything. So theoretically, Robert Tullis is at home the entire time this crime's taking place. But he's not making any calls. He's not sending any texts. He's not sending any emails from his phone. He's not responding to texts. He's not answering the phone when he has incoming calls. There's no activity on Robert Tullis's end of this cell phone for hours and hours and hours. It isn't until after we see a vehicle that looks much like the assailant's vehicle entering into Robert Tullis's community that Robert Tullis actually uses his cell phone. In the face of all of this evidence, the defense has to put forth a case. Thus far, they have called 3 witnesses. Now, that's pretty much a synopsis of the evidence that the prosecution presented. There's a lot more that kind of corroborates the existence of this evidence and the chain of custody of all the evidence and how it is highly unlikely that this evidence was planted. Robert Tullis's wife was home at the time that the search was conducted at her home, by the way. So there's a whole lot of corroborating evidence. Now, we first heard from Dr. Mark Chambers, who was called upon to provide some analysis of reasons that someone who is on trial for a crime or charged with a crime might try to off themselves. And he pointed to some material, a peer-reviewed study that showed that people who had been exonerated for crimes for which they had been charged had gone on after they had been exonerated to reattempt offing themselves. And from that, the jury, I think, is expected to believe, according to the defense, that, well, Robert Tullis, in doing whatever he was doing to inflict self-harm when he got stuck in the bathtub, wasn't doing so necessarily because he had a guilty conscience, but maybe just because he knew that he was going to be charged in the murder of Mr. Gearman. However, the prosecution came back and pointed out, well, you haven't interviewed Mr. Tullis, have you? Nope. You haven't done any tests. I'm sorry. You've only interviewed Mr. Tullis. Yep, we've only interviewed Mr. Tullis. We spent a couple hours here, hour and a half there interviewing him. There were no other interviews of anybody else, and you didn't run any tests. Like, you do have the ability to kind of determine whether or not people may or may not be telling the truth, and you didn't run any tests regarding that. Nope, didn't do any tests. And you're not testifying about any of the events that occurred on 9/2 of 2022. Nope, not talking about the crime at all. But you can testify that perhaps you are providing testimony that perhaps, a fall from grace, like, having articles written about you and losing your job as public administrator and things of that nature might lead you to self-harm. The witness says yes. And the prosecution kind of drew a correlation between, well, if a fall from grace can lead you to self-harm, then couldn't it also provide motive for you to inflict harm on others? Say, if you could kill yourself, well, then you might kill others because of a fall from grace. So the witness, all in all, didn't really go well for the defense and kind of went better for the prosecution. So then we hear from Tracy McGlory, I believe was how you pronounce her name. And that's the one who provided eyewitness testimony of some individual who was in attire markedly similar to the attire of the assailant on August 28th, I believe it was, in the park. August 28th, 2022, days before the murder took place. There's somebody who's dressed kind of like the assailant in the park. This person didn't have on any reflective clothing, so it wasn't the exact same attire. It was just similar. She was unable to identify the person, and she could hardly remember how the park was laid out, even though there was a picture of the restrooms where she said the assailant, or I'm sorry, not the assailant, this individual who was dressed like the assailant was in the park. She couldn't really place that building in the context of where she was, or, other aspects of the park. But she was able to watch this guy for 30 minutes. And, he found his activity suspicious. So basically, it didn't really look like that did much as far as casting doubt on whether or not Mr. Tellis committed this crime, because it arguably had absolutely nothing to do with the crime that was committed. And then the defense gave us the witness that they gave us today, who essentially testified that no, Mr. Tellis didn't use his phone at all for all those hours, corroborating the testimony of one of the prosecution's witnesses from the police department. Mr. Tellis turned off his location services for the entire month of August after the prosecution has put forth evidence that it looks like he was planning this crime during the month of August, that he was taking surveillance photos looking for Mr. Gehrman's automobile in the month of August. So this kind of turned into another witness for the prosecution. So that's kind of where we are at this point. The defense has done absolutely nothing to directly refute any of the evidence that was put on by the prosecution. Their witnesses are either not saying anything that has anything to do with the crime, or they're corroborating the testimony of the prosecution's witnesses. They're saying the same things. That's the first three witnesses for the defense. And there's no reasonable doubt that has been created or bolstered by any of these defense witnesses. So what are they going to do next? Again, midway through the prosecution's case, we begged the question, who is the defense going to call to refute any of this? And so far, they've been unable to produce a single witness that can refute anything. At the end of the prosecution's case, we said, there's a mountain of evidence against this guy. How does the defense deal with it? And you've got a jury who is engaged, who, for every expert that has been on the stand, they have questions. And for other lay witnesses that have taken the stand, They've had questions. They are engaged. They're involved in this case. They want to get this right. And the defense isn't giving them anything to work with. So, again, I can't imagine who the defense can possibly call. There's speculation in the chat here and online that this afternoon we're going to hear from Mr. Tellis. And that is the only possible witness that we can hear from that's going to give us, that I can come up with, that's going to give us anything that could possibly refute what the defense has put forward. But him taking the stand is a bad idea because the prosecution is going to eviscerate him. It's going to be bad if he takes the stand. I hope you'll join me this afternoon, 5 o'clock, so we can see what the rest of day 6 of the Robert Tellis trial brings us. For now, my name is Nathan Saunders, and this is The Legal Good. Thank you for coming out.